anytime we deal with information security across the organization, it's always about risk management and ensuring we manage our risks adequately and ensuring the risk impact to the organization is managed effectively. And it helps us prioritize where we place our risk resources across that management process. So, in this video series, we're going to talk all things risk analysis methods. We're going to take a look at the different types of risk analysis methods, plus also some common terms around or common terms associated with risk analysis and what they are. So every time we start thinking about risk analysis and what we're going to start looking at across our business infrastructure, think of this as a process that helps us evaluate known risks within using risk assessment procedures, right? We want to go away and develop a risk mitigation plan, a risk treatment plan, define what those risks are with the organization, and then we put a plan or a procedure in place to document and keep things updated, right? So when we create a risk register, this is a living document that we're going to have across the organization that tells us the different risks across the business. Now, we're going to get into a lot more details on later videos. Just in this video, we'll keep it quite high level, cover some terms around risk analysis and what they are. And the very first sort of form around risk analysis method or methodology is our quantitative risk assessments. And this is kind of, if I just write out quantitative, and quantitative, if you want to put some sort of definitions to this, it's basically assigning numeric values. All right, it could be through a monetary focus, could be a numeric value that helps define that analysis component. So it could be a scoring or a number. It's kind of scoring or number driven, and there's usually a calculation or an equation to the calculation process. So it's very. I'm going to put here. It's very precise, right? And this is a very precise driven metric that we determine and define what our risk appetite is across the organization. So this allows for cost benefit analysis, what the cost and the risk may be versus the actual risk. So we can come up with some sort of metric, and it's more scientific and objective in nature. And that's qualitative in a nutshell. The other area is our quantitative. Sorry, qualitative. And qualitative, if you're kind of on the same terms with quantitative and qualitative, basically qualitative is, you have a general rating or a levels of rating to that analysis, right? So we could have some sort of metric scoring system. So I'm just going to draw a little square here and give it some sort of numbering, and just bear with me as I continue doing this. And then let's just say the top is our critical. And then as we go lower, maybe we've got high, and then maybe here is our mediums. And then maybe we've got things like low, and then maybe another value below low could be something else. I might just change that to green actually, because green kind of defines that it's a low risk. And then I'll just put a thing here, just say, look, on a number of scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got a number scaling metric sort of analysis method, right? So we can put some sort of low here, then we've got medium, then we've got high, and then critical. And this is just subjective to obviously the video that I'm writing out right now and drawing out with you. Other organizations use different terminology, different methods. There's severity instead of criticality, instead of critical, could be another name for high that we're going to use. And we'll cover a lot of this in later videos, but this is just sort of an overview anyway. So with qualitative, kind of think this as sort of general ratings, right? We may do a pen test, and out of that, we're going to have a theory-based or an opinion-based qualitative assessment to say, well, based on the risk and based on what we're seeing, is our subject matter expertise, and this is how we define the risk across the organization, right? So it's a bit more subjective rather than objective being our quantitative risk. So in this part right here, we can put some details to this, right? We can have the inputs and the opinions of maybe people that know that system very well, so they can give us an opinionated feedback or an opinionated risk feedback based on what the risks could be with that application or maybe with that infrastructure or what part of that process may be, right? So it's a likelihood versus impact kind of scenario. So I'm just going to put here likelihood versus the seriousness equals our risk. And that's a kind of methodology that we sort of apply when we talk about qualitative risks. I'm just going to put likelihood times our seriousness, and I'll give you an example of this as we walk through it, right? So what this can allow us to do is we can then prioritize and compare risks across our business if we're using the qualitative approach, right? And we'll talk more around quantitative as well. But while we're on this subject, we'll just stick to the qualitative. So when we define qualitative, let's just say, for example, one, we'll have a phishing scenario, will be our scenario number one. Just do number one here. And then over here on the right, I will do maybe something like a scenario number two. And this will be maybe a mobile phone. And this could be a mobile phone that gets lost within the business. So maybe our executive team have mobile phones, and we come up with a risk management program to say, look, if a risk mobile phone is being lost, or maybe someone has left it in a cab or at the airport, well, what's our process? What's our risk appetite with this? So we can define what they look like. So when we start talking about qualitative, we can give this um, a different comparison, right, between the two. So if I just stick with the mobile side, we can say, well, based on the likelihood of someone losing their phone, well, maybe the likelihood could be a 3. Maybe we have certain controls in place. We have an MDM, a mobile device management tool set in place. We can maybe erase the phone. So we've got some sort of control mechanisms in place. And maybe the seriousness of that could be maybe a 2. Maybe they don't have, maybe the only thing is could be emails, and to access the emails I need to log in through multiple means of access. So they'll need two-factor authentication. Maybe they'll need an SMS that gets sent to their phones, and that sort of thing. So maybe we've got the seriousness could only be a 2. It's not that critical because we've got ways of maybe preventing those sort of attacks, right? So you can give that a rating. So we can plus these two together. So the 3 plus 2 is 5, and that gives us on our risk rating a level of 5 with our mobile phones. Now I can take that with our phishing example, and if I just change pens here, and then I can say, well, based on the likelihood of our phishing scenario, maybe it's a specific business unit that we're dealing with. They're more susceptible and more prone to our phishing attacks because they're more externally focused. So we need to have more of a social presence, for example. However, we do have some controls in place, and we're doing user awareness training. Our executive team know what to do if they're if they see a phishing email go by. We've got certain processes in place. So the seriousness may only be maybe a 3. So again, now we plus these two together. So 4 plus 3, 5, 6, 7. That gives us a rating of 7. So we can start to compare the rating of our phishing versus our mobile phone. And in this case, our phishing is more of a higher risk than our mobile phone. Now, this is again just an overview, and you kind of take in this likelihood versus seriousness of that impact, and then you'll give you a final risk rating overview. And that's how we can sort of compare the two and then put in adequate controls based on our qualitative theory-based approach to risk analysis. Now, as we continue on, there are some terms that you may hear when we start dealing with risk analysis, and we're going to cover what they are, and we'll cover some of their requirements as well. So the very first value that you may hear when we're dealing with risk analysis methods is our asset value. So you may hear something of an asset value. We'll define what these are. What I'm going to do right now is I'll just write them all out, and then we'll come back and visit them with some more details. So the other one here is our exposure factor, and I'll cover what that is as well. Then we've got our single loss expectancy. I'll cover that as well. And then our last two is annual rate occurrence. I'm just going to write annual rate occurrence, ARO for annual rate occurrence. And then the final piece here is our annual loss expectancy, and I'll cover what they are in just a second. So they're the kind of the 5 phases here across our risk analysis method. Asset value, anytime you may hear asset value, think of this as assigning a dollar figure or a value of an asset, right? So just say value of asset, right? Exposure factor, anytime we deal with an exposure factor, it could be the financial loss because of a threat. So I'm going to say down financial loss of potential threat. Single loss expectancy, and I'll show you how all these kind of play out with a bit of an example as well. Single loss expectancy is pretty much the value of the loss for a single loss. So we may come up with a single event, and then in the event of this happening, well, then we lose a value of that asset or experience impact across the business. So we assign that based on a single loss based on that specific threat. So I'm just going to say single loss of impact. and then our annual rate occurrence. So this is the estimated number of times the event will happen over a given period, and that could be over a period of 5 years, could be a period over 10 years, or a single year. Maybe it could be a single year, maybe over a year period end to end. So, and then we come up with obviously the monetary side of things. So how much that money we could lose against the impact as well. So I'm going to say for the annual rate occurrence, this is an estimated number of times the event will happen per year. So sometimes when we start dealing with risk assessments and risk management, we may look at a risk across maybe a 5-year program. So for example, if we lose a mobile phone or a laptop of the company and we assign that dollar value to the value of the impact, and then maybe we put a historical occurrence to that, so once every 5 years, and then we determine, well, if someone is susceptible to losing their mobile phone maybe once every 5 years from an annual perspective, well, that could be maybe zero point 0.2 of a time. So I'm just going to say zero point 0.2 per year, and that's over a 5-year period, right? So that's going to give us a total value. So then we can go away and determine what that ARO would be, and then determine its annual loss expectancy. So we'll cover that in just a second. So how much do we estimate to lose? So this is our estimation. Just clean that up. So this is estimation to lose per year. So let's just walk through a bit of an example of this. So let's just say that we've got a mobile phone, right? And we assign a single loss expectancy value, maybe that's 5 grand a year of a value. So we assign, okay, if we're going to lose a mobile phone, maybe that happens, once every 5 years, for example, and that happens twice. So for that annual loss expectancy, that'll be 5 grand across that 5-year period. And then that happens once every 5 years. So the annual rate of expectancy in this case would be once every 5 years. So I'm just going to put 5 years, and then I'll just say once, and then that'll give us annual rate expectancy of 0.2 times per year for this risk. And then we times the two, so 5 times 2, or 0.002, which would be the per year expectancy. And then that'll give us our annual loss expectancy in this example, which could be $1,000. I'm just going to put 1K here. And that's our annual loss expectancy. So every year we times it two with our SLE and then our ARO, and that gives us our annual loss expectancy, and that value is $1,000 a year on how many times this could happen per year, right? So that's our single loss expectancy, our annual loss expectancy, and then our single event cost. So that's how we will typically go through and sort of prioritize and figure out how much it will cost us per year and reduce those risks even more with obviously new costs after that. So we basically drive down the impact to the organization again by reducing that risk. I hope you've enjoyed this video. We've covered a little bit more than I would have liked to hope, but I hope you've enjoyed this segment. And if there's any other questions that you have around risk management or risk analysis methods, I'd love to hear about it. Thank you for viewing. And as always, see you all in the next video.